Welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, we have my response to a listener's request, which is an episode about managing medical issues in aging parents. So as us physicians become mid-career and even maybe hopefully late career, we're going to have to deal with the issues involved with aging parents. And so on today's episode, we have Kathleen McGuinness, who's an experienced senior care specialist. Her personal experience as a caregiver for her aging parents and husband inspired her to shift focus, and she became a certified dementia practitioner, senior home safety specialist, end-of-life specialist, and meeting planner. And she leads a home care company and is the commissioner of the Montgomery County Commission on Aging. Kathleen McGuinness, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So first, a word from our sponsors. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. And we're back. Kathleen, I want to get started first with a question related to the person that recommended that I interview you specifically on this topic, Eleanor Tano, because Dr. Tano specializes in these end-of-life documents, right? So the question for you is somewhat related to the documents. What are the legal matters that we need to make sure that we get ahead of when we're contending with medical issues with our aging parents?
Great question. And I've had different varieties of all these questions with my own family and then with clients as well. Some of the basic ones are obviously your will, a living trust if it's complicated, the durable power of attorney, a medical power of attorney, an advanced healthcare directive, and a HIPAA release form, the bare bones that I think every individual should have. My father had none of these, and he was teetering at middle stage of dementia when we began to get these in process for him. My mother had hers, and my husband had his, but had to be changed. So those are the beneficiary designations. There is guardianship and conservatorship if necessary, but that's, I think, further down the line, not necessarily right away.
So per my discussion with Dr. Tano, it's best to have these discussions when everybody's perfectly healthy.
Yes.
And they're of sound mind and body to make these decisions, and they need to be updated every so often. But sometimes when we end up having these conversations, it's when things are starting to slip. And so how do you navigate the complexity of initiating these conversations? Hey, Mom, when's the last time you looked at your will? Why are you asking me that? Oh, who's your medical power of attorney? Why do I need that? I feel totally fine. Like there are sometimes implications under these questions, and appropriately so, that make them tricky. So what's your recommendation for initiating these conversations?
They are tricky conversations, and I think it's to be a little strategic with the conversations, choose the right time and setting for an older adult, generally in the morning when they're a little bit fresher and not just when they're fresher in the morning. And I think expressing your concerns about their care and well-being, not their assets, is an important point to point out.
So that's a great point. So Mom, we're worried that if something should happen to you, we want to know very specifically what your wishes are in a whole bunch of different situations. So you're fine now, but you never know what's going to happen. So who gets the house? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And in my case, my brother conveniently lived in Paris when both my parents were very ill. I had to quit my job in the British West Indies and come home basically to facilitate their care in two different states. And so I appealed to my parents. You don't want Patrick and I fighting constantly. We need your guidelines. We need a will. We need this information so that we can take care of you and not cause any harm to our relationship as brother and sister.
Hey, I just listened to this great podcast episode by Brad Block, and he and his guest, Kathleen McGuinness, had some excellent points that I think we should discuss. Hey, this has nothing to do with you and what's going on in your life right now, but someone brought this to my attention, so I think we should have this discussion. Or you can even say, hey, a friend of mine's parents is going through this. And it made me realize that we've never talked about it, and I think we should. So I think not putting the emphasis on that it has something to do with them that sparked the discussion.
I think that's perfect counsel, and I shall do that going forward as soon as I get the link to this.
So Paris in the British West Indies.
Yeah, I worked in the Cayman Islands for the Ministry of Tourism, Commerce, and Aviation. And both my parents are Washingtonians, as am I, but I needed to take care of them pretty much full time. Different locations. I still had my own house and my husband, but they're bill paying, all of those life matters. I needed to get digitally very proficient in paying the bill for daddy's home. They're divorced. My father's home, my mother's home, my home, and my mother's rental home. So
this brings
all
up
of those documents, yes, would need to be, in case mom slips on a banana peel, I need to know.
Yeah. So that brings up the next question, actually, which is that, like, in many cultures, there is multi-generational living where you've got kids and parents and grandparents, kind of like in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? You had Charlie, you had his parents, and you had all four grandparents lying in that bed, feet to face, right? And so in a lot of cultures, that's what you see. But in America, we're like scattered to the winds, right? You guys were in different countries than where your parents were, not this multi-generational living. How do you overcome the barrier that this creates, especially given the example that you give, where sometimes the onus falls on one particular sibling, where that sibling does not appreciate the fact that it's fallen on them? I recognize this is a cardinal sin of podcasting. You do not stack questions, but I'm doing it anyway.
Okay, yes. And to say I had a mild resentment against my brother would be to put it mildly. I love him dearly, but the onus was on me and I took the challenge. So leveraging technology, one bonus, if you will, of COVID is Zoom. So that is very easy to leverage technology now with our loved ones, no matter where they are. And smart home devices are also important to help families stay connected. Technology, I think, is the best one. In my experience, just something simple. My husband had frontotemporal dementia and was in a assisted living for respite care after he fractured his back. And I could not get him to answer the phone. He never turned on his phone because he was saving the battery. And there was no phone in the room. And this was not that long ago. So I would program my Alexa here to his Alexa in his room for comfort. Number one, to play doo-wop music at 8 o'clock at night. So it would comfort and soothe him. Would put on a specific doo-wop channel for him. Play it for 8 to 8:45, and then done. And then hopefully he's asleep. The Alexa would also say, Joe, don't leave your room. I'm coming, Kathleen. And that would be the only way that I could encourage him not to wander the halls or be somewhere else when I was coming to pick him up. They now have, you could do FaceTime, you can do all kinds of things that are pretty easy, but I really felt like the Alexa was very easy to manage. No input from him was required.
Yeah. Those are great suggestions. And so what about navigating the sibling issue, right? Like with your parents, when you counsel other families and see this same problem repeating over and over, where one ends up taking the lion's share, which seems to be the most common story. How do you help people to navigate that?
In my personal case, I hired a social worker to negotiate some guidelines with my brother and I so that there would not be Monday morning quarterbacking frequently on decisions that I need to make because I'm right here. I'm the boots on the ground. So I often encourage my clients. I hired a social worker, a care manager to help facilitate a dialogue so both people get heard, and we divvied up some of the responsibilities, letter writing, some of these issues. I delegated to my brother. He made a commitment to no more Monday quarterbacking, and I sent him a bill every month.
The bill was for the social worker, not like
for
compensation for your time. Yeah.
Oh,
it was.
compensation for
Okay.
my time.
Okay.
I
And
wasn't
so you're
a
saying,
professional provider at the time, but I was doing consulting jobs, and So just doing an expense report and mileage to show my brother how much time and money and energy was spent in caring for daddy, that it was coming out of our inheritance pot, so to speak,
Yeah.
since I was managing the money. And he found that to be very reasonable. So I'm happy. He's my only sibling, my only relative, so to speak, other than my children. And I'm grateful that we worked it out.
Yeah, able to maintain the relationship, which is ultimately what I'm sure your parents would want.
Yes.
So, with regards to caring for aging parents, something that happens to all of us inevitably, some faster and some slower, is cognitive capacity decreases. And the way that it was explained to me by my colleague, the colleague who requested this episode, was it's more like a ramp and not a cliff, right? It's this slow decline that does accelerate as we age. So what are your suggestions for staying ahead of that curve of decline as that occurs? There's this concurrent loss of independence. So how do you stay ahead of the curve of decline?
I think that's a great point that you make, that it is a gradual process. It's generally a ramp as opposed to a cliff, and involving them in their community, if at all possible, locally, is the first start. So there are villages, nonprofit entities that are all over the United States, which is a nonprofit neighbor-to-neighbor network. When I moved to this area where I am in Chevy Chase, Maryland, first thing I did was join the village so that my husband could receive support services, a friendly neighbor visit, caregivers or volunteers that would take him to get his catheter changed so I didn't have to take 2 hours off work. It also helps prevent social isolation, where there are social groups for the men would meet once a month for lunch, or all these other Zoom and social activities. So I think the community programs, and there are so many of them everywhere in the United States, no matter where you are, as well as local county entities. For me, I serve as a commissioner on the Commission on Aging, and I could probably tell you 15 entities that are involved in preventing social isolation with pretty large staff behind it. Depending on your capabilities, engaging a geriatric care manager, a care navigator, or a social worker early. Many geriatric social workers, care managers have a wellness program so that you can put, here in the Washington metro area, it's very common. I can make an appointment for a client. They do an inventory, they do an intake, and you meet with them once a quarter just to check in. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed after a slip and fall. And you have somebody who's built in, ready to advocate and navigate the corridors of hospitals for you, which I think is really important these days.
So you mentioned the social isolation aspect of it, and that I think is a great way to get to the next question, which is mental health, right? Because a big part of mental health in this situation is the social isolation that can happen. And so getting ahead of that is certainly going to be helpful. But nonetheless, it's not like that makes the mental health issues go away. And as we lose independence, those mental health issues can become magnifying, right? Like you lose autonomy, it causes anxiety, it causes depression. How do we manage that or help with that, especially if there is resistance? No, I'm fine. No, I don't need this help. No, I'm fine. You keep hearing that over and over when meanwhile you realize that they're not. So how do we help with mental health while also managing any resistance to it?
I think that's a hard conversation for kids to have with their parents or their spouse. Building trust and open communication before the ramp gets too steep and they're not really able to comprehend, but to make sure that you're having open dialogue with them, to continue with mental stimulation for them, whether it's crossword puzzles, computer games, jigsaw puzzles, making sure that they're physically as active as they can be. That's a great mood booster. Whether if they can't get up, they can do chair yoga. When I was working with my husband, he didn't want to use a walker because Real men don't do that. So I got him hiking poles.
Okay.
So he would hike around the neighborhood while we would walk. And I also had him on the Mediterranean diet for health issues and just good, healthy, fresh food. We tried an antidepressant because he was having such difficulty sleeping. That's a hit or miss conversation sometimes, or just trial and error. Talking with your personal care provider, your medical professional, is also a good way to keep them mentally healthy as by noticing changes.
That's an excellent point. If there's an issue with mental health, sometimes that can be improved by getting at it from other angles, right? Like sleep. There might be like, no, I'm not going to take anything for depression, but how's your sleep been? Oh, my sleep's been absolute trash. Okay, then maybe we can start you on something for that. Like you kind of have to take this like sideways approach to it. You go in through the back door in order to help them in other ways. And then navigating the conversations around losing independence, like if they have to move, right? If they're no longer safe in their own home, or they're no longer the resources available to them in their own home, and they need to move to be it a nursing home or at least some type of elder care community, how do you navigate those conversations? Because my limited experience has been people are really reluctant to leave their homes, especially when they've been there for decades.
Yes, they are. The house is not really set up, and there's just lots of good reasons for that. I introduced a professional, a social worker, on the ramp to have that dialogue with my mother. I explained to the geriatric care manager, my mother is very resistant to go to assisted living, and I need her to go to assisted living because she's unsafe at home and isn't aware of it. The parent-child relationship or the spouse is, I found the mother dynamic and also with my father and my personal experience to be very challenging. I'm not the boss of them. And even though I tried to approach it with a lot of empathy and care and love, I'll make my own decisions. I invited a geriatric care manager into the conversation and to take over, convince my mom that this was the best thing for her and also her children. Our peace of mind was wrecked. Too many middle of the night hospital visits, too many walking out the door. Anyways, it only took about 2 months, and my mother was on board with moving into the assisted location of her choice.
So what you're saying is there's this power dynamic between a spouse or a parent and a child. And so that complicates things. But when you remove that power dynamic and the history of that relationship and have a third party get involved, it removes a lot of that aspect of it. And then it allows people to look at things more objectively.
Yes.
And so you said this is an a geriatric, what did you refer to them as?
A geriatric care manager.
Care manager, okay.
Yeah, there's Aging Life Association, which is a nationwide organization that many people can check with to find a geriatric care manager in your area. Or you could just Google geriatric care manager or social worker.
Fantastic. I'm sure that's a huge resource in these situations. And so the last question that I want to ask you about is regarding medication. Now, I also recognize this is an interesting dynamic between us because it's a physician asking a non-physician about medication compliance, and the listeners are all physicians. And yet the question is going in the direction that we're not used to. But here we are. And there can be issues with medication compliance, especially with this cognitive decline that happens, right? And there can be issues with polypharmacy, right? You end up on so many medications, especially with all these automated refill systems, right? Like you get these automated refills, even though the physician may have intended to stop this medication. Sometimes these systems just don't work like they're supposed to, or maybe, who knows, like they are supposed to on the pharmacy end. And you end up with a lot of medications maybe that not be necessary or redundant, especially when you have a bunch of different specialists. So what is your advice for navigating the complexities of medication compliance and the risk of polypharmacy?
In my experience, checking the medications is really an important role. First choice is a brown bag with all the prescriptions to the pharmacy. Ask the pharmacist to tell me if any of these are conflicting. It turned out both my parents were in assisted living, as was my husband in nursing care. But I did notice that every time they came from rehab to hospital to assisted living or to home, nothing personal, but you doctors, your handwriting is really bad.
Hopefully they're all on computerized records by now. That's a huge risk. And I'm sure all the physician listeners know this. Anytime there's a transfer of care from home to hospital to skilled nursing facility back to home, even transfer of care from one doctor to the other doctor, from one hospitalist to the other hospitalist. There's inherent risk in the transfer of care. We all know this, and then unfortunately we end up living it in these situations. So handwriting notwithstanding, so your advice is bring it in a brown bag, bring the brown bag full of medicines to the doctor's appointments, and make sure that you as the child assistant there for all of those appointments? Or is there
Yes.
other way that we can get a little less involved and still be effective?
Yes. Again, if people can afford it, a concierge doctor practice is also helpful. When I engaged a concierge-style medical professional internist for my husband, I realized that he had been on 2 high blood pressure medications of different names, and we never noticed it. I'm sure it wasn't helpful, but doing a comprehensive medication review with your primary doctor every time you go in made it real simple for me. When I took him to the emergency room, which was frequently, I just made a simple picture on my phone of all the pharmacy bottles, the doses, the real names, and whatever. And it wasn't particularly high tech. Now I use carezone.com, where you can input all of this data digitally. And that way everybody knows. You can share that with other family members or other people that are on the family board of directors, if you will, to help manage this care. I also used caringbridge.org, which is a nonprofit, to create a family website that would exchange all of this information. And somebody else would remember, have you checked his medication lately? If some new issue cropped up, because you can't think of everything. I believe also medication therapy management is a free service through Part D for eligible patients with Medicare. So you can do that too. Using one pharmacy. When I meet with clients, they have 3 pharmacies. I'm like, why are you doing that? It just makes it so hard to keep track of things. So all your medications with one pharmacy is my strong suggestion. Go ahead.
You mentioned a bunch of apps and ways to leverage technology, right? Like earlier in the interview, you mentioned using Alexa. Now you're mentioning some apps that we can use to make sure that we're using the correct medications and that we're all on the same page with them. Is there any other way that we can leverage technology in these situations? Any other apps that you can recommend or technologies that you can recommend? Not necessarily medication specific, but just in elder care in general. You mentioned hiking poles.
Yes, there are lots and lots of apps that people like to have on their phone, but I can only give you my experience for the last 10 years or so, and the ones that I tried and failed. And caringbridge.org I felt was excellent. I used the Alexa and also carezone.com for all of their medical history in there, and that's what worked for me.
That's great, especially sometimes you're within one health system, but a lot of times we're in multiple health systems and transferring all those records. But if you have all of the medication lists, the past medical histories, allergies, surgeries, that's, the bulk of what we need. Having access to every single medical record, not necessary and cumbersome, in fact. But when you have it all in one concise place with all the pertinent stuff, it makes it easier. And then those transfer risks, when you transfer to the hospital, to the SNF, to back home, get significantly lower. So those are fantastic. Let's say someone wants to reach out to you, right? They want your advice. Maybe you can help them. Where's your online presence? Where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, or they can email me at kmm7720@gmail.com. I am semi-retired, and I purposely do not have a website. All of my business is word of mouth.
Fantastic. So, Kathleen McGuinness, thank you so much for taking the time and all you do to help people help their family members.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.